fine here. Yeah, no worries. There you are. Wow, aren't we lucky to have heard that original recording of a celebrity in 1607 signing an autograph hunter's book? Simply wonderful. Hello, and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. Another week, another sonnet, of course, and today we're looking at Sonnet 107. Now, I think this one is a relatively tough one. I got lost a few times, so just to give you a little heads up, that it's not one of our easier ones. And I feel like we've been thrown a few of those recently, so it's only about time that Shakespeare gave us a toughie. And maybe you won't find it a toughie at all. Maybe you'll think, Theo, that was bloody easy to understand. I don't know what you were moaning about. And if you did think that, then you're a cleverer person than I. So, with that all out the way, let's take a listen, shall we, to Sonnet 107. Not mine own fears, nor the prophetic soul of the wide world dreaming on things to come, can yet the lease of my true love control, supposed as forfeit to a confin'd doom. The mortal moon hath her eclipse endur'd, and the sad augurs mock their own presage. Incertainties now crown themselves assured, and peace proclaimed olives of endless age. Now with the drops of this most balmy time, my love looks fresh, and death to me subscribes, since spite of him I'll live in this poor rhyme, while he insults o'er dull and speechless tribes. And thou in this shalt find thy monument, when tyrants' crests and tombs of brass are spent. So there we have it, Sonnet 107. Now, on the surface, it's not too dissimilar to some of his previous sonnets, you'll be not surprised to hear. We've still got the classic young lover, and we've got Shakespeare saying that you will be immortalised through my poems, and actually Shakespeare himself will be immortalised through his poems, which I feel we've had, 10, 11 sonnets about this in the past, so it's not new territory. However, he is talking about there having been some shaky times recently, and a lot of people think that he's referring to the monarchy and the life that he was leading at the time and political things that were happening. So there is a sort of angle of that in this. You probably wouldn't have noticed just reading it. I certainly wouldn't have done, or hearing it for the first time. But we'll get to what those could have been when we break it down line by line. So let's do that now and find out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in Sonnet 107. So we start with, not mine own fears, nor the prophetic soul of the wide world dreaming on things to come, can yet the lease of my true love control, supposed as forfeit to a confin'd doom. So that quatrain is all one long thought really, but let's break it down. So I think he's saying here, neither my own fears or indeed the speculation of the whole world about what will happen in the future can keep me from having my true love, aka you, my young lover, which everyone thought was doomed to prison. Our love, I think he's talking about there, rather than his literal young lover was doomed to prison. I think he's saying that people, or everyone, or whoever the hell he's talking about, thought that his love with his lover was doomed to prison. So he's talking about, despite the uncertainties and everything going on in the world and the unknowingness of the future, nothing will keep me from having my true love. So he's been quite, relatively forceful there to his young lover and saying nothing will get between us. I mean, it is nice, I guess, if you hear this and you don't feel the same about Shakespeare, if you were the young lover, put yourself in his shoes, and you maybe didn't love him as much, then that is quite a forceful statement he's making there. But let's just assume that he does love him, maybe. So this is sort of the first seed of, this time in Shakespeare's life when he was writing this in the early 1600s. There was uncertainty in the world and a potential worry about what would happen in the future. And this could be, scholars think, and you know what, I sort of agree with them, that this uncertainty that Shakespeare's talking about could be related to Queen Elizabeth's death. And this is backed up by the next line. So let's take a listen. The mortal moon hath her eclipse endur'd, and the sad augurs mock their own presage. So the moon, which, we always thought to be mortal, has finally been eclipsed. And, these sad old augurs, or fortune tellers, as they were, are now laughing at their own predictions. So they're going, oh, silly old us augurs, we got it all wrong. Damn. You'd be annoyed if you paid money to the fortune tellers, to the augurs, and they got it all wrong, wouldn't you? I want my money back, please. Now, this line, the moon being eclipsed, could well be relating to Queen Elizabeth's death. The almighty monarch, the queen who we thought would live forever for some mad reason, has died, and her life has been eclipsed. And that's sad and uncertain times, especially during that period. I mean, you were all alive when our last queen died in England, and there was a whole hoo-ha about that, wasn't there? And lots of people lined up and paid their respects, and it was a big deal. But back then, I'd say even bigger deal, because you're like, who the hell is taking over? What's their vibe? Are they going to be an absolute tyrant? Because obviously they could pass all sorts of laws back then, and now the monarchy are just sort of knocking about and don't really have that much power, I'd say, or certainly not as much as they did back in the day. So there would have been a real worry about what this new person coming in was going to do, what the laws they were going to pass were, and how people were going to be treated under their rule. And just for 1 second, allow me to return to the previous line, because having further researched this, there is a chance that Shakespeare wasn't talking about, their relationship, him and his lover's relationship, being confined to prison. It might not be a metaphor, because some people believed that Shakespeare's lover, the person he's been referring to for all these poems, is a man called the Earl of Southampton. And he, the Earl of Southampton, was put in prison in 1601, I believe, by Queen Elizabeth for his taking part in the Essex Revolt. And he was popped in the Tower of London. But then Queen Elizabeth died, and old James I, King James I, took over, and he released the Earl of Southampton. So there is definitely a chance here that Shakespeare was talking about his young lover being the Earl of Southampton, who he thought was going to be in prison for the rest of his life under Queen Elizabeth, and then James I gets in and releases him. So it's all jubilation, really. And I think when you read the poem, there's definitely, if you've got that in the back of your head, it does make a lot of sense. But of course, that is absolutely not definitive. And he could have been talking about prison as a metaphor and just times changing. This is just one school of thought, but I enjoy it as an idea for sure. Let me know what you think about that one. Anyway, we continue with Incertainties now crown themselves assured, and peace proclaims olives of endless age. So uncertainties have now become certainties, and peace is here to stay. It's a nice way of saying it. It proclaims olives of endless age. So again, this could refer to Queen Elizabeth dying and James I taking over. A time of uncertainty has now been met with peace and stability. Now, with the drops of this most balmy time, my love looks fresh, and death to me subscribes. Since spite of him, I'll live in this poor rhyme, while he insults o'er dull and speechless tribes. So now, with the blessing of these, I guess, soothing times, balmy, I've looked up in the Onion's Shakespeare glossary, and of course balm was soothing. We don't use it so much anymore, but it's a lovely word, isn't it? So these soothing times, my love looks fresh again, and death subscribes to me. And on that note, why don't you subscribe to this podcast if you haven't yet? God, that's a good little segue, isn't it? Don't subscribe to death. Well, you can if you want, but also I would say subscribe here first to this podcast, and then if you want to subscribe to death, you can. But Shakespeare is saying death actually subscribes to him. So death submits to him in a way. Since in spite of death, he, Shakespeare, will live on in this poor poem. I don't know why he has to call his poem poor. I think it's quite a good one, actually, Shakespeare. Don't do yourself down. Whilst he, death, prevails over stupid and illiterate people. Now, that I do have a little bit of a problem with. It's not a good look to say, look, death, I have outsmarted you. I'm going to live on in my poems, but you just go and kill all the stupid and illiterate people, because he's saying that those people are less than himself. So he's being a little bit classist here and saying that only sort of stupid and illiterate people are the ones that can't outsmart death, which I don't think is a great thing to put in a poem. And reading this 500 years later, it doesn't make you look great, Shakespeare, I will say. Anyway, now we're on to the final couplet. And thou in this shalt find thy monument, when tyrants' crests and tombs of brass are spent. So you, Shakespeare's lover, will find your monument in this poem. This poem will be your monument when tyrants' reigns end and tombs of brass decay. So that is a long time, you know. If tombs of brass are decaying, brass is quite a long-lasting material, so you know that is a long old time he's talking about here. Essentially, this poem will last forever. Well, you know, I mean, brass will probably decay over many, many years, but it's a long time. And that he's probably thinking, God, what will take a long time to decay? Brass, for sure. So that's it, Sonnet 107. Lots of interesting things coming up in that one. Is he referring to the Earl of Southampton, or is prison a metaphor? Is he just saying that people thought that him and his young lover's love was confined to prison, and no one thought it would be a real thing, free and unashamed, etc.? Was he referring to Queen Elizabeth and her death and James I taking over? There's lots of questions unanswered, and you know what? We will never know the true meaning of this sonnet, which is, I think, quite enjoyable. We can talk about it all we want, but at the end of the day, the only person that knew was Shakespeare. Well, probably not. I mean, at the time, he probably told his mates what it was about, but we will never know, and that's quite exciting. And for what it's worth, I quite like this Earl of Southampton theory. Maybe we should do a little episode a little short episode on the Earl of Southampton and who he was, just to dive into that theory a little bit. That might be quite fun. Right, I think it's about time we put this to our story. And if you'll remember last week, Shakespeare and his lover, well, his on-off lover, Christopher Marlowe, they were at church together. Ben Jonson was there as well, don't worry. And Shakespeare managed to convince Christopher Marlowe to come back to his house and, try the relationship again. Christopher Marlowe seemed relatively keen. He was won over by Shakespeare's sonnet. And they went back to Shakespeare's house. Shakespeare was like, oh, do you want a cup of tea? Well, I can't remember. Did he go to the toilet? Can't remember why he left. Anyway, he had an excuse to sort of leave the room. And Christopher Marlowe saw a little door ajar in Shakespeare's house. Walked in to this room, and there were sonnets all over the place, bits of poetry stuck up on the wall. It was like a sort of, those CSI crime scene things with strings running between two bits of evidence. He was quite shocked. Anyway, Shakespeare comes in and goes, oh no, you've seen this room where I basically collect bits of poetry and that were referring to beauty, because really they were trying to describe you, Christopher Marlowe. Lovely old Christopher Marlowe. So he has said, look, stay here. Christopher Marlowe's freaked out. He says, stay here. I've written Sonnet 106 and you need to listen to it. So he's just read Sonnet 106, which is, all about these old writers and beauty and how they're trying to describe Marlowe's beauty or Shakespeare's young lover's beauty. But they can't really. It's not even possible. So let's find out how that's received by Christopher Marlowe and how Sonnet 107 fits into all this. Shakespeare finishes reading Sonnet 106 to Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe backs up to the door. Shakespeare, I thought you'd turned over a new leaf, but you're just as insane as you were before. Look, I can't do this anymore. Just when I thought you'd changed, you come up with this, and you've got a room full of all this poetry and talking about my beauty again. It's too much. He breaks down, starts crying, and runs out of the door. Shakespeare chases after him. Chris, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know I can be overbearing. He grabs him by the arm. Christopher Marlowe turns on him and says, Shakespeare, I never want to see you again. And slams the front door in Shakespeare's face, running down the cobbled street. Shakespeare slumps onto the floor and cries his little heart out. Days and weeks pass. Shakespeare is deeply, deeply depressed. All he can think about is Christopher Marlowe and his lost love. 2 months later, Shakespeare, who's hardly left the house and has grown a full-on beard, hears a knock at his door. He goes to answer it. It's his frenemy, Ben Jonson. Ugh, what do you want, Ben? Haven't you heard the news? What? What is it? Queen Elizabeth. What about her? She's dead. You're joking. Queen Elizabeth? Bloody hell, I never thought I'd see the day. We all thought she'd live forever. Did we? Yeah, didn't we? That's what all the fortune tellers were telling me, that she'd live forever. That's weird. It seems like you were maybe conned there, Shakespeare. Shakespeare said, no, I wasn't conned, actually. Those fortune tellers, they do good work. Ben Jonson says, well, look, this whole Elizabeth thing and her dying, it got me thinking. Whatever happened to the Earl of Southampton? Your old lover. You remember him? Oh my God. And Shakespeare suddenly perked up. The Earl of Southampton. He'd been in a relationship with the Earl for a few years, maybe about a decade ago. He was a fantastic lover and a very gorgeous young man. But of course, due to his riots in Essex, he was put in the Tower of London by Queen Elizabeth. And Shakespeare eventually kind of just forgot about him and thought, oh, well, he's going to die, so probably not worth pursuing. But now, Shakespeare says to Ben Jonson, does this mean that there's a chance that the Earl of Southampton will sort of be released from jail? And Ben Jonson says, well, I think there is a strong chance of that, because when a new monarch comes in, often they do release prisoners that they think were wrongly imprisoned. Shakespeare says, well, who's taking Elizabeth's place? Sorry, I don't really know too much about the monarchy. Well, it's King James I, of course. What do you mean? What do you mean the first? Well, it's King James, because he is the first. But there might be a second James, is all I'm saying. So let's just call him King James I, just because, if King James II comes along, we can then refer to, you know what I mean. Yeah, okay, I'll just call him King James, because that makes much more sense. Wow, King James. He is a forgiving man. I'm pretty sure about that. He's definitely going to release the Earl of Southampton. Oh my God, I might see the Earl of Southampton again. My long lost lover. Well, not lost, he was in prison and I sort of just never visited him and kind of forgot about him. But my God, when I think about him now, he was really sexy, wasn't he? He was sexy, wasn't he, Ben? He was. He was a good-looking guy, Shakespeare. Yeah. But don't you think he's going to be a bit pissed off that you haven't visited him or anything? No, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. He'll just be gagging for anyone to see him when he comes out of prison, won't he? He'll be desperate for a hug. So with that, Shakespeare waited a few days, then popped on his coat and made his way to the Tower of London. On his way, he bought a lovely red rose to give to the Earl of Southampton when he met him at the gates. At the Tower of London, Shakespeare went up to the Beefeater, who was there at the gate, of course, with his big hat and lovely red coat, and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Beefeater, is this the day that the Earl of Southampton gets released?" And the Beefeater says, "Yeah, I think he's in there somewhere. Yeah, he's probably coming in a couple of minutes. You just hang tight and he'll be out." Shakespeare said, "Oh, great, okay." And he waits there. He slicks his hair down and twiddles his moustache. And eventually the gates open and the Earl of Southampton is standing there. He looks a bit worse for wear, to be honest. He's obviously been in prison for a number of years. He's lost a lot of weight and he's quite grey. But through that, Shakespeare can see a glimmer of his former beauty. And by God, it got Shakespeare excited. The Earl of Southampton looked at him and went, "William? William Shakespeare? That's right, it's me. I've come to welcome you out of prison." And the Earl of Southampton said, Why haven't you visited me all these years? I mean, we were lovers." And Shakespeare said, I know, look, time just got away from me and got a bit lost, and obviously had a lot of plays to write, so you understand. The Earl of Southampton said, "Well, I sort of do, but I would have loved to hear from you. Even a letter would have been nice, to be honest." Shakespeare said, "Oh, yeah, I should have sent you a letter for sure. That is my bad. But look, here I am now, and I've got you a lovely red rose. And not only that, I've written you a sonnet." The Earl of Southampton says, "Oh, I've forgot all about your sonnets. You used to write me sonnets when we were younger. They were lovely. Can I hear it?" And Shakespeare says, "Yes, let's walk down to the Thames, and on our walk I will recite it to you. God, it's good to have you back." So they wandered down the street to the River Thames, and Shakespeare removed Sonnet 107 from his back pocket and read, Sonnet 107. "Neither my own fears or the speculation of the whole world about what will happen in the future can keep me from having my true love, who everyone thought was doomed to prison. The ever-mortal moon has been eclipsed, and the pathetic old prophets are laughing at their own predictions. Uncertainties have become certainties, and peace is here to stay. Now, with the blessing of these soothing times, my love looks fresh again, and death submits to me, since in spite of him I'll live on in this poor poem, whilst he prevails over stupid and illiterate people. And you will find your monument in this poem when tyrants' reigns end, and tombs of brass decay. So there we have it, in a crazy twist of events. Shakespeare has potentially forgotten about Christopher Marlowe, and remembered his long-lost love, not lost, just been in prison, the Earl of Southampton. I'm excited to see how this relationship pans out, given that Shakespeare hadn't seen him in prison for a long time, and I would be quite pissed off. But find out next week on the final couplet. Until then,